This video is going to be a short introduction to photosynthesis. So we'll be thinking about what the difference is between heterotrophs and autotrophs, the word equation for photosynthesis, why it's important, and how leaf structure can help photosynthesis happen efficiently. So you'll all remember from earlier on in school that there are several characteristics of living things. So these include things like movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, and nutrition. And sometimes, that's a little bit of a naive list. So there are more complex things like homeostasis that we will be considering later on in our course. But let's focus in on the nutrition side of it and think about the different types of nutrition that happen in plants and animals. Now, all living things need to obtain nutrients so that they can release energy and use that energy for growth. Plants are autotrophs, that means self-feeders, so they can make organic materials from inorganic water and carbon dioxide, and they do this by harnessing sunlight energy during photosynthesis. Now, anything that is a heterotroph, so that's animals, fungi, anything that essentially isn't green in terms of photosynthesizing, that type of feeder is called a heterotroph, and it depends on the food molecule already being made. So it's almost like a food web idea. There has to be a molecule for the heterotroph feeder to break down. They can't build it up by themselves. So photosynthesis is obviously fundamentally important. And if we think about what photosynthesis is, it's actually an incredibly complex series of chemical reactions. It takes place in the chloroplast, and the overall chemical reaction is carbon dioxide plus water, and it makes glucose and oxygen. And I say overall, the chemical equation is that, because it's actually a huge number of different reactions happening. But before we consider those, let's think about the structure of a chloroplast. This sort of structure needs to be seen down an electron microscope, because what we call the ultrastructure, the inside bits of a chloroplast, are very complex. It is a double membrane structure because originally, way back at the beginning of life starting to evolve, free living photosynthesizing organisms were probably engulfed by a primitive animal type cell, and then for some reason weren't digested, and they live on inside all plant cells now with chloroplasts in them. So chloroplasts have a double membrane structure on the outside, but they also have stacks of membranes inside them called thylakoid membranes. You can see those here, and these are the important membranes inside chloroplasts because they're the ones which hold the green pigment chlorophyll. And that chlorophyll molecule is the one that can capture sunlight. Now, in amongst the rest of the space inside the chloroplast is a sort of fluid-like structure called the stroma. And floating around in that will be some of the products of photosynthesis that are being stored, like starch or lipids, which are fat droplets, but also a bit of primitive DNA and maybe some ribosomes that are making some proteins specific to photosynthesis. So we've seen the structure of chloroplasts there. And if we think about the steps in photosynthesis, you can see it's more complex than just water plus carbon dioxide making oxygen and glucose, but you can see that here. So we've got water and carbon dioxide coming into the system and oxygen and glucose coming out of the system. But on the thylakoid membranes, that is the start of the photosynthesis equation, where light energy is used to smash water molecules in two. And when it does that, it releases the oxygen as a waste product and passes the hydrogen from the water across to the liquid part of the chloroplast, the stroma. And it's here, under the action of enzymes, that carbon dioxide is turned into glucose using the energy from the sun and the hydrogen ions that were passed across from the reaction which needed light. So we have two major steps in photosynthesis, one needing light to break apart water and one needing carbon dioxide and enzymes to make glucose. But both of these happen inside the chloroplast. So there's a summary in words. The light reaction, or the light reaction occurs inside the chloroplast on the thylakoid membranes, and then the light-independent reaction, the one that doesn't need light but does need enzymes, happens in the fluid part of the chloroplast, the stroma. So you can see here, without photosynthesis, we wouldn't have the rest of life on Earth. It's critically important. It makes glucose. Glucose is used in cellular respiration by every living cell and powers their cell activities. And this production of glucose from carbon dioxide is called carbon fixation. So it's the beginning of all our food chains. And photosynthesis is playing a vital role in the carbon and the oxygen cycles in our ecosystems. And it's also the basis of all fossil fuels and biofuels that exist. So we need stuff for photosynthesis to be able to happen, and that stuff is water and carbon dioxide, and we also need some conditions. So how does the plant cell get its water? Well, it enters by the soil, through osmosis, into the roots, and then moves around the plant through xylem vessels, which are sort of straw-like empty vessels that the water can be sucked along. And carbon dioxide starts off in the air and it enters the leaves through the stoma, which are holes in the lower side of the leaf, and diffuses into the photosynthetic cells down a concentration gradient, because it's just diffusion. The chloroplasts contain chlorophyll already. That's that green pigment I was talking about inside the thylakoid membranes. It actually looks green because it captures the red and the blue light from the sun and uses that to break apart water molecules. And it doesn't use the green, so it reflects the green. And the leaves themselves are often flat and thin, and they tend to arrange themselves so they don't overlap too much to maximize sunlight absorption. So we can provide the conditions, the chlorophyll and the light, for photosynthesis in this way. If we take a close look at the internal structure of a leaf, on this image we've got the top of the leaf here, and the bottom of the leaf underneath there. And the top of the leaf, you'll see actually, if you take a quick look here, we've got layers of different tissue types, different cell types, layered one on top of the other. So we've got some outer cells here called epidermis. Then we've got these cells standing like soldiers up near the top surface. These are palisade cells or palisade parenchyma. And they contain lots of chloroplasts because they're near the top of the leaf, so they get lots of sunlight. Underneath those, there are some rounder shaped cells that allows air spaces in between. These are called the spongy cells or the spongy parenchyma. They still have a few chloroplasts in, so any stray sunlight getting through that top layer and through the palisade cells can still be picked up and used for photosynthesis. But importantly, there are air spaces. And that means that down on this bottom layer here that you can see, the lower epidermis, where there are holes, these are the stoma, produced by the guard cells on either side of them, the carbon dioxide can enter through these holes, move around the air spaces, and eventually diffuse up to the very heavily photosynthesizing cells at the top here. But there are some cells over here called xylem and phloem. These are the tubes that carry water up to the leaf from the roots, but also the phloem carrying water and sugar dissolved in it away from the leaf where it's being made to the rest of the plant. So you can see how the structure of a leaf is very well suited for photosynthesis. It's pretty thin, so the light can strike all the way through and so that diffusion can happen quickly. The layers are very cleverly organized so that diffusion of the carbon dioxide can occur between them, and you've got these these transporting vessels to bring the water in and take the sugar, the product, away. When you look down a microscope, what you normally see is something like this. So top layer along the top here, these do not have chloroplasts, and they are the upper epidermis. They're protecting the leaf from drying out when it gets warm on that top surface with all the sunlight. They actually produce a waxy layer on top of them to stop the water evaporating. These are your tall, thin cells. These are our palisade layer. They are doing all of the photosynthesis, and actually you can see sometimes it's 2 cells thick. And then underneath, the spongy cells with lots of air gaps in between them. So these cells are the round cells. A few chloroplasts, but lots of air spaces. And then the lower epidermis at the bottom. A similar function to the upper epidermis, makes a nice waxy cuticle, keeps the leaf from drying out, but also allows guard cells to create holes where the gas can get in, and of course oxygen can get out. And you can see some of those tubes that are carrying water in and the sugar away, sliced either fully on or sideways here. These are the vascular bundles. So that's a little bit of a quick overview of what photosynthesis needs, how it gets it, how the leaf structure helps it, and also just a little overview of what photosynthesis itself involves.